the life of Moses is very conveniently divided into three 40-year segments. The first 40 years he spends living in the palace in Egypt. The second 40 years he's tending the flocks in the wilderness. And of course the final segment we find that he's the deliverer of the people of Israel, bringing them out of Egypt into the promised land. Although of course he doesn't enter that land himself. Joshua is the one that takes the people through. But it's all nice and convenient, 3 40-year sections of his life. And it's the second section that we pick up on in this story, where Moses takes the flocks out and he has this amazing encounter with God at the burning bush. And it's important to bear in mind that Moses is at the end of that second segment, so he's 80 years of age. And that's the general thrust that I want to bring in this message, apart from the points that we look, of course, which will apply to any age group. But the general thrust is that we're never too old to serve the Lord. There's a lot made, and rightly so, of young people serving God, knowing God, doing things for the Lord, and that's important that we emphasize that. I used to work in youth ministry myself many years ago. Some people continue to work amongst young people. That becomes their main focus for the rest of their Christian lives. And I think it's important that we do pass the baton to the next generation, that we do encourage youngsters to serve God, to get involved in the things that are available. But at the same time, without taking away from that at all, I think we also need to emphasize the fact that we're never too old either. In life, sometimes people develop, maybe subconsciously, a middle-aged attitude, pipes and slippers, so to speak. So they start to take it easy as they get older. Now, of course, physically, there may be limitations as the years advance. But as far as God's concerned, as long as there's breath in our body, then he wants us to serve him. And Moses is a great example that he was 80 years of age when God called him into the greatest thing that he had ever undertook at that particular time, far more than any of the other things he'd done in his 80 years of life put together, and that was to lead the people of Israel out and into the promised land. So I think it's important to bear that in mind, that God doesn't finish with us because of age. There's no ageism with God. We don't retire with the kingdom. There's always something for us to do. But the 3 points that I want to look at, which of course relate to Moses, because that's the text that we're taking for this message, but they also apply to any age group. So it's not just for old, inverted commas, people, this message, but it's for all of us, whatever our age may be. The first thing that we see, if we want to get into that place of service for God, effective service for God, the first thing we see is desire. There has to be desire. We notice that the bush was on fire. Now that wasn't quite unusual. It may be for us depending on where we live in the world, certainly for those of us in the Western world, to see a bush on fire would be quite an unusual thing. We'd probably think the kids have set it alight in the local park. But it wasn't particularly unusual for Moses, because the part of the world where he was, all natural phenomena and events and things came together, so bushes, trees would often ignite. But of course they would burn out. But there was something special about this particular bush. It kept going. So that aroused the curiosity of Moses, and he got closer. There was a desire. He drew close to God. He may not have realized it. People draw close to God initially without even realizing it. People go to church because someone has said to them, you need to come to our church because we wear casual clothes. The minister doesn't wear a dog collar. The minister doesn't wear robes. We have a guitar. We have drums. And that might be curiosity that draws people in. Just like it was with Moses, that he was drawn in by something that aroused his curiosity. But he drew in, and that's the important thing. Desire has to come if we are to serve the Lord effectively. In fact, if we're to know the Lord, but this is more of a message about service rather than initially coming to know him. So we have to have a desire that draws us in. There has to be something within us that wants to serve God. There has to be something within us that wants to do more than just go to church on a Sunday morning for an hour and a half, sing a few songs, listen to a sermon, and then go home. There has to be a desire within our hearts, within our spirits, that draws us in. So that's the first thing we see in Moses, that there was a desire that drew him close to God. The second thing that we see is that there was availability. Because once he's there, God begins to speak to him. And Moses said to God, "Here I am." We have to have that heart attitude of availability if we are to be effective in service for God. It's not an availability on our terms whereby we tell God what we want to do. It's literally a surrender to him. What does he want us to do in our lives? So availability is important. We could be the most gifted, talented person in our church. But if we're not available, then we will never be of any use in the kingdom. So availability is really important. In fact, it's more important than gifts and abilities and talents. Because God can anoint us and bless us and develop those things in our lives. But if we're not available, then we'll never move off the first rung of the ladder of service. So we have to be available. There has to be a willingness in our hearts to serve God. There has to be a desire in our lives to want to do something for him. So availability is very, very important. And then thirdly, and finally, there has to be acknowledgement. God said to Moses, "Take off your sandals, for the land on which you stand is holy ground." The people that were barefoot at that time were slaves. So a free man wore sandals. Moses was a free man. He wore shoes. But God said, "Take off your sandals." In other words, there was a challenge immediately on priority. Did Moses think that he was going to be a great man of God, that he was now going to have great position and he would have a great fame and fortune that would follow him? Or was his heart going to be one of literally recognizing that he was a servant to the Lord? And that's important. I think certainly in this day and age of internet and social media, we are in danger of creating celebrity pastors, celebrity ministers. Now, of course, if you're on Twitter as an example and you're a pastor and you post devotions and you post scriptures and all that sort of thing, and you get 100,000 followers, then that's great. We can't say that that's wrong, because the more people we connect with, the more people we reach with the gospel, the more people we encourage with the good news of Christ. But there is a danger that we start to move into realms where we can become celebrities, because that's what, for many people in today's society, want. That's what they aspire to become famous, to become known. And people sometimes will literally do anything to become famous. So we have to be careful that we don't start to move into those areas. I'm a keen football fan, soccer if you're in North America. And sometimes when I listen to the managers talk, the coaches talk, they talk about my players, my captain, my goalkeeper. And I cringe a little bit at that, because it's setting themselves up and above that person. If I were a manager or listening to managers talk, I prefer the ones that talk about us, where we're all in it together, where it's not about me as the main man and you down there, but actually it's talking about us as a team. And you start to get this creep in to Christian circles where pastors talk about my church. Now, I use the term my church to describe the church that I go to, but I never use that term to describe the church that I own as if it's my church, because we shouldn't feel comfortable talking like that. And you see pastors or hear pastors talking about my worship leader, my deacons, my elders, as if they're somehow above those people. And I think we need to be very careful, because the spirit of this age certainly leads people down that particular path where we're at the top of the pyramid. But in Christian circles, there's no room for that. There's no space for the celebrity pastor. Yes, lots of followers on Twitter. Yes, lots of likes on your Facebook page or whatever the case may be. That's great, because we're reaching more people, but not because we're famous or we're celebrities. And what God did with Moses all those years ago, when he established, I'm God and you're man, that's what we should be aware of even now in the 21st century. That it's not about us. God may use us. He may use us in a great way to bring glory to him. We may connect with thousands of people, hundreds of thousands over the years, maybe millions even, with the advent and the ongoing development of modern technology. But always we should remember that our shoes are off, so to speak, that we're slaves, we're servants of God. We're not the ones that call the tune. He's the one. We say to him, Lord, what do you want me to do? Where do you want me to go? He's the one who's in control. And so I think this passage in Exodus is a great piece, because first of all, and the main general thrust overall of it, is that we're never too old to serve God. We'll never be made redundant. We'll never be put on the scrap heap. We'll never be replaced by a younger model or someone else. That'll never happen to us. As long as we keep going and our heart is right and we keep serving the Lord, there will always be something for us to do. Even if we're quite old and frail and we can't get around anymore, we can pray, we can encourage, we can write letters, we can use the internet in the way that it should be positively used for the kingdom. We can do a whole load of different things. But there'll never come a time when we are made redundant. There'll never come a time when we retire. There'll never come an age in our life when God tells us, that's it, it's time to put your feet up. There will always be work to do, and I'm glad of that, because I'm not looking to retirement. I'm not looking to the day when I can quit serving God. I want to continue doing that for as long as there's life in my body. But then the 3 points that we brought out that are applicable to all of us, regardless of our age, if we want to serve God. There has to be desire, there has to be availability, and there has to be acknowledgement.